Hello, everyone. I'm Nina Goradia. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to share some of this work with you all. What we're going to do for the first hour or so is to go into some somatic experiencing theory. I'm also going to be blending in some of the other trauma modalities that I've studied. But before we do this, I invite everyone to close their eyes just for a moment so we can prepare. And I invite you to feel into whatever structure is supporting you right now, whether it's a chair, maybe you're lying down, whatever it is, I want you to really feel the physicality of the support underneath you and behind you, just so we can ground a little bit before we begin. Feel the edges of where these structures are supporting you and where they're not. As we come into our body, some of this intellectual material that we're going to be covering first may resonate with you as well in the body. So we just want to make a little bit of a connection with the body before we begin. As you close your eyes, you might be able to perceive these sensations internally a little bit better. Take a moment to notice your breath and try not to change it in any way, but just allow it to be just as it is. We're just doing a check-in with ourselves. Wherever you might have been a few moments before we began, your body is here now, but allow your mind to also arrive here in this present moment, in this room. And when you feel anchored a bit and grounded, feel free to open your eyes again and we'll begin. So thank you to Jessica and Dave for the introduction. My name is Nina Goradia. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And what I'll be sharing today is not only some somatic experiencing, but other trauma modalities that I've blended with it. So over the years, I've kind of noticed when other modalities can increase efficacy of some of the techniques and when it is helpful to just stick with the pure SE. And so I'm going to try to summarize as much theory as I can for you today in a very practical way. So what is somatic experiencing? For those of you who may not be aware, it is a technique invented by Peter Levine, who's a PhD. And what he found is that wild animals, they follow their fight or flight instincts when they are under threat. And so they're able to discharge the adrenaline that arises in their bodies as a result. However, domesticated animals, because we have trained them to go against their instincts and to follow whatever we've asked them to obey, they clamp down on that defense mechanism or that fight or flight mechanism, and then their instincts are suppressed, that adrenaline does not get to flow, and they are susceptible to PTSD as a result. Now, humans, we are by far the most domesticated of all, and we often do things that are different than what we want to do. So one easy way to see this is imagine that maybe your supervisor at work is upset with you, maybe even yelling at you and being inappropriate, and think about what you might wish you could do versus what you end up doing, and really look at the contrast of that for a moment. So you might want to say something back or walk out of the room, but what might end up happening is that you're smiling and nodding and saying, thanks for that feedback. But at the same time, your face is flushed. You might be feeling a lot of adrenaline as a result, but it's not really getting discharged into any sort of fight or flight response. So we need to ask ourselves, where does all this adrenaline go? What damage could it be doing to our bodies? Is this excess energy being stored in the body if it's not getting discharged? And does this have later consequences because of this? And so humans, because the fact that we have been socialized to not just be with our emotions as they are and follow our fight or flight instincts the way that animals do, because of this, this is what makes us susceptible to PTSD. And the beauty of somatic experiencing is that it allows us to go into the body, into the limbic or emotional regions of the brain, as well as the reptilian region of the brain, which is where trauma occurred in the first place. And it allows us to feel through these same sensations that we felt through the first time. However, the first time, we often didn't have enough capacity to feel them through in order to discharge them. So what this means is we didn't have enough space or time to feel it through. We didn't have enough support, enough felt sense of safety. We didn't have the knowledge of what to do, and we didn't have enough resources in general in order to feel through the tremendous amount of stimulation that was thrown at us with a particular traumatic event. And so the body, in its wisdom, allows us to suppress all of that excess energy in order to survive that moment of our lives, because we want the organism, the body itself, to survive. Otherwise, it doesn't mean anything. But then later, we are required to feel through those emotions that were stored, even 20 or 30 years later, because otherwise that stored energy could be running our lives without us even feeling like we have volitional control over it. And so when we do have capacity, we are able to go back for ourselves, for those emotions that didn't get looked at and cared for, and we want to really take care of them, watch them consciously, acknowledge them, feel them through. And this allows not only the emotions to release and discharge from the body, taking the load off of the body, it also allows for an organization within the nervous system in the body, a reorganization. And this is something that needs to be done very carefully. It's not something where we just jump in and relive an old trauma. That would be very re-traumatizing. And so it's really important to do it in a facilitated way where we're just dipping our toes in, feeling a little bit through, and then coming back out to something that feels safe. And we go in and out like this in a very titrated, careful way, allowing the body to slowly restructure over time. And so this is just a bit of an intro. I'm going to continue with some theory. It's going to be a deep dive. So I just want you to know this, but this will be recorded if you need to, refer back. And I have other videos as well that explain it in more detail. But I'm going to sidestep the traditional trauma information that a lot of people may be already aware of. And I'm going to go right into the somatic aspects. And I asked everyone if we could save questions for the third hour. We're going to go straight through with this theory so that it's just succinctly said. And please, take notes if you have questions for later. So I'm going to pull up. Here we have a graphical representation of the autonomic nervous system. And if you see here on the left side, this is denoting activation or stress. So as we have an increase in stress, we go into a sympathetic response. If the stress goes so high, we come into one version of parasympathetic. If you notice here, all the way down here where there's no stress, there's also another place called parasympathetic, and I'm going to explain why there's a parasympathetic on both sides of this graph. But first, let's look at what normal healthy function looks like. This green right here, this green curve, is a normal activation and settling cycle. We go through these every single day, all throughout the day, and this is a normal, healthy part of how our nervous system functions. Animals in the wild, when they have this activation, there is a threshold where energy is released if and only if they are not adding thoughts to whatever they're going through, and if they're not suppressing the emotions that arise. When they are allowing their emotions to be just as they are, they have this increase that hits the threshold, and there is an automatic letting down, an automatic inbuilt resiliency mechanism of the nervous system that allows it to go right back into parasympathetic. And so when we have domesticated animals, as they have an increase, they're going to have some sort of conditioning where we've taught them to obey something other than their instincts. And they're going to either suppress what is arising, and they're going to fall short of this threshold, or they're going to be, afraid of the consequences and adding stress to it. And so that allows them to not have this normal letting down. And so when we look at this normal healthy fluctuation, this is really the model for everything. I want to show you all the different ways that humans have been socialized to feel and to be and to function in the world other than what is naturally arising for us. So if you look here at the blue, this is when we are suppressing our emotions. Now, a lot of people who are in this category are intellectually bypassing. They might be spending a lot of their time in their head intellectually, but they're not feeling their feelings. And even though these feelings fall below maybe even their threshold for awareness of the emotions, what's happening is they're still expending unconsciously a lot of energy in suppressing these emotions, and they might not even be aware of them. So when I work with people who are dealing with the suppressed emotions, I'm really digging. When they're talking about things, I'm really asking them, are you sure that doesn't bother you? They might be saying, I'm fine, I'm fine. You know, that's what people go through when they grow up. But we want them to really acknowledge the pain of what happened and to start to feel this in the body. Now, if they still cannot, we might do some sort of body grounding exercises, similar to what we started with in this workshop, just feeling the structures behind them, below them, starting to feel their emotions that are arising with smaller and smaller events in their life. We want to increase the sensitivity of our awareness of our most subtle sensations in the body. As we do this, we are better able to identify and locate the emotions that arise from not only daily events, but also from our past traumas. As we can identify and locate them in the body, we are then able to employ techniques to clear them. However, if we cannot first feel them in the body, we're oftentimes stuck in the conceptual mind, and it's hard for us to actually release them. So that's what I do with these people here. So this purple line here, this is for when we are overshooting this threshold where energy is released. Now, an example of this would be, I feel stress from a particular event, but then I also feel additional stress from my thoughts that I'm having about that event. And I overshoot, and I can spin here for years and years if I keep on adding thoughts and then believing those thoughts. And I'm not going to get this inbuilt natural resiliency mechanism release happening. And so this is something that often happens when people try cathartic sort of therapies. Sometimes they can be effective, but oftentimes what happens is that, for example, with anger, if I choose to hit a pillow and I'm just hitting it and hitting it and hitting it, what could be happening is that I'm feeling the stress, plus I'm cultivating thoughts of further anger, which are constantly increasing what I am adding to the anger I'm already feeling. And again, I can just hit that pillow forever until I can just watch it with equanimity. So watching it without adding a story to it. Now, if I can do that and be neutral as I hit the pillow, then I can dislodge whatever energy is in the body, and I'm not adding. So what I tell people who I work with in the office for this, when they're at the purple line, is I say, you know, I noticed that a lot of emotion is arising for you right now, and I want to hear your story. However, what we need to do is feel through some of this emotion. And so I ask them, what if you were to turn your attention just to what is happening in this moment in the body? Let's put the story on hold for a moment, and we're just going to feel what happens. Well, the moment they do that, they come down to this line where the threshold of the energy release can happen. And it can happen in just within a moment. And there can be with and observe just what is there in the body. From that moment, we employ techniques that can help release it. And so there's another group where they have, and when I say group, it doesn't mean that some people, all of their reactions are here and other people, all their reactions here. The same person with one trauma could have been suppressing, and with another one, they're hyper focused on it and they could be here. So we always look at every situation freshly. We try not to have preconceived notions about where we even think we ourselves would be. And so in one situation, a person might have so much terror, so much activation and stress that they go into a deer in headlights sort of phenomenon. And that is called dorsal vagal freeze. Now here, they bypass the sympathetic state and they are in a different level of parasympathetic. So both of these parasympathetic states what they have in common is they look like the person is not expending very much energy. Both states are energy conservation states, but this one is with a very high state of arousal, very, very high stress. So high stress that we go into energy conservation out of a sense of hopelessness. It feels like the predator has gotten us. This is what prey do when a predator seems like they're going to win. They play dead. But it's not that they're thinking about playing dead. That's what the body naturally does in dorsal vagal freeze. It freezes. It's hard to move. It's hard to think. It's a survival mechanism. And it can help in many ways. So if a predator does not see us or thinks that we're dead, it might get bored of playing around with the prey and it might end up leaving. And then the prey has an opening where it can escape. And so another reason this can be helpful is it could help a prey camouflage with their background by not moving and being so still, more still than they could have done on their own volition. And so in this state, when I see people in the office and they're in freeze, and this could be because something came up in the moment, or it can be that they're thinking of an old trauma that causes them to relive this freeze state. And so as that happens, what I tell them, because usually people get very scared, you can see it's the highest level of activation, stress, fear. And then, but they might not even be able to speak. And what I tell them is, oh, do you think that you're in freeze? And that happens to me all the time. And it's said in a way that I'm just reassuring them about how normal it is. When we normalize something like this, it's very critical because what often keeps people in freeze is their fear of being in freeze. It continues to amp up the activation, the fear, and it just spirals them. It just keeps them there. But once they can start to look at it without creating any stories, without assuming that something bad is happening or something wrong is happening, then the thoughts are no longer feeding this excess fear energy, and they're able to just relax and wiggle out of it. And so these are 3 ways that we can go into compensations that are on this side of the graph. Now you can see one here. There is a way that we can get stuck in a parasympathetic state. Now, a lot of people think of parasympathetic as rest and digest. This is the place that everyone wants to be when we're calm, we're feeling good, we're feeling socially engaged. But it's not like we want to be here forever. We also want to have this flow up here into sympathetic because otherwise we'd never get anything done. We want to have access to this energy when we go to work, and we want to have access to parasympathetic when we go to sleep at night, when we are digesting our food. However, there are times where we can undershoot this and go too far into parasympathetic, and that is going to look like a lethargic depression. It might look like someone is sitting on the couch and just not able to even hold their posture, that they're just, hardly able to hold themselves up. And what I've noticed with people who are dealing with this is there's often not enough energy within the system. And there are ways that we can, some interventions we can do here as far as breathing exercises, as far as even just changing up diet. Sometimes we can be eating really heavy foods that are weighing us down because there's not enough life force within the food. So having some lighter foods like fruits and vegetables can sometimes just pull that up. And so these are 4 ways that we have been conditioned, or that ways that we can deviate from this healthy fluctuation. So I know this is a lot of theory. We do have more videos that explain this in more detail if you'd like. But for now, I'm going to move to the next slide, and please take some notes if you've got questions, and we can come back to this slide later in the 3rd hour. Okay, so here we have a bird's eye view of trauma. Now, this is a flowchart that I've put together, and it's a blend of many different techniques. This bottom box is actually mostly somatic experiencing. And then I've kind of put these 2 with other modalities because the first 2 years that I practiced pure SE after graduating, people were getting better. But sometimes they'd come back in 6 months and they'd say, it feels like it's coming back. And what I've noticed over the years as I integrate some of these other techniques along with it, I've been able to get these results to last longer. And I'm going to explain to you exactly why. It's really important to understand how the energy of trauma moves within our experience, between our thoughts, between our emotions, and storage within the body. So we're going to start here with our psychological thoughts, judgments, assumptions, and the story or the narrative we tell ourselves about what happened. Now, psychological thoughts, these are different than functional thoughts. Functional thoughts might be like, I have to make a left turn. I need to go to the bank. You can see that these are just thoughts that, don't really create a lot of emotion. However, psychological thoughts might be like, the world is a scary place. I'm not good enough. And you can see how thoughts like this can create emotion within the body. Similarly, our judgments towards situations, assumptions we make when not really knowing the full story of something, and whatever bias or slant we may have about a particular story. Now, there's one caveat to this. These thoughts, judgments, and assumptions, they only create emotions for us if we believe them. They do not create emotions if we do not lend them our credibility. And I want to explain this in detail. So imagine that we have two people come into this room that all of us are in, and I tell you, one person has dementia and the second person is a genius. And both of these people tell you, the world is going to end today. Who would you believe? And would you believe either of them? Notice with the person with dementia, you might feel some compassion for them, but you're probably not going to say your goodbyes. Whereas the person who's a genius, and maybe they work for NASA, we might say, what do you know? We might have a different reaction based on who tells us this. But the fact of what they said remains the same. They both said the same fact, the world is going to end today. So what is the difference? Why does one person saying this cause me to feel compassion, whereas a second person saying this might cause me to feel terror? Notice it's who I lend my credibility to. If I see the person with dementia, I'm probably not going to lend credibility to their story. I'm not going to believe it. And the person who's a genius working for NASA, I might entertain it for a moment. And it's simply that belief, that entertainment of what they said that created the emotion within my body. Now, this emotion, it comes up as sensations and physical reactions in the body. And we're going to actually test this out and go into this in the second hour in the experiential section. But what I want to say about these emotions, did you know that they are actually not a problem? There's nothing wrong with emotions. However, most of us have been socialized that some emotions are the good ones and some emotions are the bad ones. So we spend our lives trying to get rid of the bad ones and trying to chase the good ones. But has that ever worked for anyone? It's never worked for me. And it's a recipe for suffering if you think about it, because do the good emotions ever seem to stay? And do the bad emotions, even if they're gone, do we ever stop living in fear of them coming back? So it's not really peace, is it? And so as we start to work with our emotions, we realize that it's not the emotions that are the problem. It is how we've been socialized to be with the emotions, how we've been conditioned to fear, dislike, resist, and suppress our emotions. Now, when we do this, it causes the emotions to get stored within our body, within our cellular tissues. Now, why did this compensation happen in the first place? Well, unlike the wild animals, which do not have these fears, these dislikes, these resistances, and these suppressions of their emotions, remember, they're just with their emotions as they are. However, we often have learned to behave this way with our emotions for several reasons. One, we were not unconditionally loved for all of our emotions growing up. So if I was taught that I'm not allowed to be angry, I'm going to learn how to suppress anger within me. I'm going to learn how to fear it if there were consequences given to me for being angry. Another reason that this happens is due to trauma. So like we spoke about in the beginning, if I have a lot of stimulation coming at me, so you can think of trauma in a somatic perspective as a lot of stimulation coming at me without enough capacity or resources to be able to process it. And so when I have that coming up, I don't have the resources and I need to survive this moment. I'm going to suppress this energy within my body so that I can have a fight or flight response to survive the moment, to get away from whatever the trigger is. But it doesn't mean I got rid of or I got away from the emotions that arose as a result of the trigger. These emotions are oftentimes still with me. Now, when these emotions are pushed down into our body, they can show up in a lot of the classic ways that we may know of, just intuitively: jaw tension associated with anger, neck and shoulder tension. These are the ones we know, butterflies in the stomach. But it can also show up in many unique ways that we're not familiar with. And so we're gonna explore that in the experiential section. But what I want to say about this box, this is our unconscious material. We may not even know it's there. A lot of this happened even before the age of 2. Much of it happened before the age of 8. Because before the age of 8, our brains are designed in a way that whatever happens to us in life, we are assuming it is because of us. It is our own fault. And so a lot of this gets stored before we have the discernment to realize that other people are responsible for their behavior, for their emotions. So say like in my unconscious material, I have had a history of abandonment. Well, I'm actually going to start to view the world through this filter of abandonment. And this material creates and informs my thoughts. To see how interconnected this material is, how it loops in all different directions. So for example, if I have a history of abandonment, the types of thoughts I'm likely going to have are, does that person like me? Did I say something that is going to make them go away? Because I'm trying to manage this emotional material. I'm in fact trying not to feel it because I was never taught how, and I was never allowed to. I didn't have the resources to feel it. So my thoughts are helping me not feel many of my stored emotions. Now, say like here, my history is I was a victim of some sort of violence. Then my thoughts, my filter through which I see the world, maybe, is that person safe? Are they dangerous? And so notice how our filters, they're not objective. They are very much colored by our history and by our past experiences and traumas. So if you see here so far, what we've covered is the types of thoughts that we are believing create the emotions in our body. They would not create them otherwise. And we'll go into this in more detail so you can see this to be true. When we have these emotions in the body and we resist or suppress them in some way, they get stored in the body. This colors the lens through which we see the world, and that further reinforces the types of thoughts that we're having. This is why many people have explored several different types of modalities to get some relief and then to not get full relief, or maybe the issue comes back. And so when I was practicing the pure somatic experiencing work and releasing past traumas, I was having great results. But if I was not addressing the types of thinking a person was having, and if they were believing them and their relationship with their emotions and trying to make friends with them, what could happen is they could recreate the same felt sense of trauma. Those same neural grooves are there. And even if they don't have a repeat trauma, their conditioning can lead to them feeling like it's back. So it's really important we address all the places that this cycle is reinforced. And that's going to bring me here to the left side. These 5 different ways that we can interrupt this cycle in order to actually move a trauma. So first, we're going to look at disidentification with our thoughts. So a lot of us walk around thinking that we are our thoughts, but let's evaluate that for a moment. If I was my thoughts, well, wouldn't they be with me every single moment of my life if I truly was them, if that was my identity? But my thoughts come and go, and yet I stay the same. So am I my thoughts, or am I simply the witness to my thoughts? I'm going to skip down to this third one because it's very similar, and this can also help clarify it. I find that oftentimes this first one is the most challenging for people to see through when we first look at these 5. So let's look at it in the context of emotions. If I disidentify from my emotions, I can see that I am not my emotions. They are not my identity. If I have anger in this moment, does that make me an angry person? Or does that make me a person who is simply experiencing anger in this moment? If I was my emotion, wouldn't I be angry in every single moment of my life? But I'm not. I have these constant changes in how I'm feeling, and yet I am the witness to them. So when I disidentify, I realize it is not my identity. It is still part of my experience that is very relevant. However, it is not who I am. When I do that, I get some space between me and the emotion. Similarly, I get space between me and my thoughts. I am no longer so close to them that I cannot see anything beyond them. I am not so close to them that I simply react based on what they are telling me. Rather, I have the space and the capacity to now respond to them. So let's come back up here to the second one. Now remember, thoughts, they're not a problem unless I believe the ones that are not correct, the ones that are not true, and most of them aren't true. And so what do I do though if I'm habitually believing something? So say like no one came to my ballet recital when I was 5, and as a 5-year-old just trying to figure out the world and not knowing any better, I assumed that it simply meant that something is wrong with me, I'm not good enough. Well, if I've not consciously and deliberately tried to disprove this later in life, I could be subconsciously carrying this belief with me well into my 40s and 50s. So what I need to do in order to interrupt this part of the cycle is I need to actively learn how to disprove this by asking questions. Does that really mean that I'm not good enough? Does people not coming to my show actually have anything to do with my worth as a human being? I need to go into that in detail. Once I disprove this belief, it actually renders this belief powerless. I may still hear it. I cannot always, choose what thoughts are arriving in my head, because anything I've ever heard in my entire life is fair game to pop in my head at any moment. Anything my parents said, anything I saw on TV, anything I saw in a stand-up comedy show, it can pop in my head. Because the brain is like an antenna, it's a receiver, it's just receiving things. But if I then think that I am my thoughts, well, then I'm going to start making judgments towards myself. How could you have that sort of thought? Well, have any of you ever had a thought that you didn't mean to even have? And you heard something and you thought, oh, I wish that wasn't in my head. Well, that's not your original thought at all. That's something that the receiver absorbed, and it's just in your awareness. And so it's important to not identify with it. Otherwise, it's going to cause further emotions. I can create a further belief. Oh, this means I'm a bad person because I had this negative thought. And see, I'm going to spiral deeper and deeper into this cycle. So it's very important we have the space between identification with thoughts, the space between identification with feelings. We start questioning thoughts. Are they true? Is that true? So the thought might still arise, but once I have rendered it powerless by disproving it, it then only sounds like gibberish on the radio. We do not have to buy into what it is trying to sell us. So let's go down here to number 4. Now, remember, emotions are not a problem at all. They're only a problem when we resist and suppress them. That is when we feel the pain of them, the density, the intensity of the emotion. Otherwise, it actually doesn't feel that bad when we're not resisting an emotion, even the most painful ones you can imagine. And I don't ask you to believe me. We're going to try it out in the next section. So if the only problem with these emotions is that we're resisting or suppressing them, what is the intervention here? It is to learn how to make friends with these emotions. When I befriend them, and we're going to go into specific techniques, when I befriend them, we notice immediately they don't hurt as much. They don't feel as tight. They don't feel as constricted. They start to, this might be hard to believe, they start to in fact feel pleasant when we're not resisting them. And so once I make friends with my emotions, they are no longer getting stored in the body. What happens when I make friends with them by allowing them, loving them, accepting them? When I do this, they actually pass through my body and out of my body many of the times. Sometimes they'll stay, and that's not a problem, because remember, emotions are not the problem. I'm simply trying to get rid of my resistance to them. I'm a sentient being who's designed to feel all the feelings of the rainbow, all the spectrum of emotions. So I will never, ever escape my biology. To have a goal to not be feeling one's emotions is not a practical goal. The goal would be to make friends with my emotions, to not be at war with the emotions that will inevitably arise within me. It's very important to understand this, because many people are on a journey of, quote, fixing themselves, thinking that it's bad that they are feeling. Feeling is what makes you an empathetic human being. Feeling is what helps you connect with the rest of humanity. Feeling is what gives you meaning in your life. And so it's very important to realize that the feelings are not the problem. It's simply the resistance. When I befriend my emotions, they pass through my body, which is what they were originally intended to do. That process got interrupted by trauma, a lack of resources or capacity, or by being shamed or not loved for certain emotions that arose within me. In Latin, emotion means that which passes through. And so that's exactly what happens when we make friends with our feelings. Finally, we're going to come down to our unconscious material that is stored within the body. The way that we do this is we learn how to observe the sensations that arise when we think of these traumas, and we observe them objectively. I do not recommend doing this bottom part on your own at all. It took me maybe 8 or 9 years of doing this work professionally for other people, even before I started doing this part on myself. The reason is, when we have trauma, the definition of trauma is I did not have the resources or capacity to handle it. And so it got suppressed. So if I'm going to revisit one of my own traumas, especially if it's a big one, I better be bringing with me far more resources than the last time I left it with. Otherwise, it's very easy to get sucked into the trauma vortex. It's much better, much safer to work with somebody who's trained, who can also provide that additional space for you, and that you can do this safely where you don't get sucked in. You just do it step by step, piece by piece, in a way that is safe and on your own terms. But the gist of this part is that what you will do is observe the sensations objectively, allow them, befriend them using particular techniques. The more you work on your unconscious material, you will have less and less material here. This box becomes smaller and smaller. You start getting less and less racing thoughts that are trying to protect you from feeling your emotions. And so it's very important to be working on all of these 5. Now you can see at the same time, or within the same month or 2, in order to actually move a particular trauma event from your body and from recreating it. And so I know that was really, really heavy and dense theory. It's a lot to take in, and I did not, understand all of this the first time I was exposed to it. It's really going to take some time, but I'm going to leave it here for now.